Everyone's been wanting me to make a rainbow, so I figure let's do something just like that. I'm going to be making a rainbow pistol, but this rainbow pistol is kind of tongue-in-cheek, and I will be using a full-size K26 in here. So it's not a pistol, it's just not going to have stock. So for all intents and purposes, this is going to be a full-size rainbow. To start, you're going to take your packaging tape and wrap it around the end of a 1 inch to 1/2 inch reducer bushing. This is a PVC part that can be found at almost any hardware store. You're going to want to wrap that around, I don't know, about 10 times. When you finally get it, it should fit snugly into the PVC pipe. Make sure there are no air bubbles or any kind of kinking in the tape. You want this to be as smooth as possible. When you're satisfied with the number of wraps on your bushing, just give an attempt to slide it in, and if it doesn't want to go in, that means that you need to remove 1 or 2 wraps. Always put on a little more than you think you need to, because it's a lot easier to take off some of this tape than to try and add a little bit more on. As you see, I have a small knife that doesn't want to kill me, and bingo. I'm not pushing it all the way just yet. It should be snug. It should take some resistance when you're actually trying to push it into the tube. If you have your seal good, that's the first step in having a good rainbow. Now, take that same knife, should be an X-Acto knife or anything that's sharp, and just gently saw through or chop through the excess tape. You don't need that. Shave off any of the extra that's still on there. And that looks good to me. Before we actually put this in and finalize it, we are going to measure this. Measure from the inside of this lip right here to the edge here. 15/16 of an inch, so that's the maximum we can do. This particular type doesn't have much of a lip in here. Usually this extends out about a quarter inch more, so you can drill into here. Because this one is so short, I'm actually going to drill into where the PVC pipe is going to go. Once you have your PVC stub, that's what we call these, should be about 2 inches long. I've made sure that the edges are square on my belt sander, so it's going to go in there nice and tight. Take your mallet, give it a good whack, make sure it stays in there. And now, if we drill through this, it will actually cement this in place, so this will never fall off. Now comes the fun part. This is plumber's goop. It's very, very bad for you, so we're going to do this quick. Put the goop around the outside of this guy here, and then stuff it into this. And then, that's how we know how far a plunger head will have to go forward for later. But on to the good stuff. This one's old and kind of faded. I'm actually going to use a new one. Then we should be good to go. This doesn't stick at first. Just kind of squish it on. It's not important that you have a whole ton on there. Just make sure that it's completely around the entire circumference. So now we get that in there. And now we wait for it to dry. This stuff takes about 24 hours to dry fully. You could probably work with it after 12, but better safe than sorry. Put this outside. This is really bad for your health if you breathe these fumes in. Before we do that, however, there's still 1 or 2 things I want to do while this goop is still wet. I'm going to take my 1/8 inch drill bit, and this is a 3D printed spacer that I've made. And I'm just going to mark off where I want to put the screws that will hold this in place. It's about 1/2 inch, that's fine by me. So I'm going to go to third markings and do 1, 2, and 3. Take your 1/8 inch bit and go right through the whole thing. There's no need to be gentle. You could also use the hex, because this is 6, so just go every second one. Now I'm going to use my Countersink. This is a long shank one, but you can easily get one of these at the hardware store. It's very professional, if you ask me. I'm just going to sink these screws in there. All 3 screws are sunk. I like it because it looks very professional, and if I eventually want to put a pump grip on this, I can without screws protruding out. Getting really lightheaded here, so I'm going to put some tape around this to block the fumes from coming out. Woo, that's better. Now, we need to start making some decisions here. These are the 3D printed components. I'll have them up on my website shortly. This is the pop-out rainbow catch and plunger head I have here, and some bolts that will accompany it. We'll get to that in a second. I'm just going to take these, take a pair of scissors, get them roughly to the shape that we want. And then if you have sandpaper, or like I have a belt sander, just sand off the excess. Then once you have these cleaned up, I just used a 1/2" drill bit to go through the center of the actual catch mechanism. Just take some of that excess off that the drill bit missed. This is about 100 times easier than trying to do this with polycarbonate. While we have everything out, let's just put together the plunger head. You're going to need the front of the plunger head, the back of the plunger head, the skirt seal, this guy right here, one of your 832 bolts, and one of the number 8 washers. This is very simple. Slide the number 8 washer onto the number 8 bolt. Put this rubber right on top of it. Again, that's going to be our plunger head padding. And then slide this right through here. Whoops, I forgot to drill that out. As you can see, I'm just tapping through those pieces using an 832 tap wrench. And the idea here is first drill it out with a 9/32 drill bit, and then tap right through the hole in the center of the 2 plunger head assembly pieces. This is a lot easier than just trying to drive the bolt through it. It really is worth it. So I put the rubber gasket right on there. We put the bolt with the washer and the rubber washer onto the front piece. Screw that in. Then when you have this part done, screw it into the bottom part. This rubber at the front is going to provide a little bit of cushion when this thing whacks forward against the front of the plunger tube. You have this little bit of screw sticking out the end. That's good. That's exactly what we want, because now we can screw it into our nylon rod. This piece is now 3 1/4, but I'm probably going to cut it down to just 3 because the compression of a K26 is about 3 1/4 inches, and we should be in business. Notice what I've done here with this front head. I'm using an omnidirectional plunger, so that means that this front part here with the plunger head in the front has to be chamfered down so the spring doesn't bind in here. Now I'm going to take this hacksaw and cut off the head of this screw here. It's actually not that hard. It's a hacksaw. It is supposed to cut through steel. Now that that's done, I'm going to take some of this tubing, put it over that bolt, and now take the rest of my nylon rod and do the same thing. Drill a hole and tap through it. So this is the finished product here. Probably gonna have to cut this part down a bit, but we'll see. Next, let's get the spring and assemble the rainbow catch. We're going to use a number 6 tap in these 4 holes in the donut shaped pieces here. Just go all the way through on both of them. Use your knife and remove the extra flashing around the holes. Next up, you want to take 2 screws that are long enough and go through one end and then out the other. Do this for just one of the screws on one of the plates. On the other side, with the smooth side facing inwards, if you're using 3D printed parts, twist it on, just like that. Make sure it's in there a couple turns, make sure you can still fit your catch in there, and make sure it can still move around without any kind of friction on there. Now you can put in the other screw, at the same depth, to make sure everything can still move. The final catch should look like this, now that both screws are in there. And this guy should be able to go freely through it. The only thing to note is that these holes should be facing the front of the blaster when you eventually install it. This is a K25. Now the final step is to put this on here. Make sure you note where the hole on this piece is, and slide it onto the end. Just like that. My rubber piece fell off here. I have a bigger metal washer that I'm going to put over it, so I'm just going to do that real quick now. The final assembly looks something like this. Important dimension is right here. This should be about 4 inches. It's just under 4 inches from the edge of this to the front of this. I'll probably do it We'll find out in a couple minutes. Let's give this a test fit. We took 15/16 from here, so that's where the front of the plunger head's going to hit. Now this is the spring in its resting position, but to get the best kind of performance we want some pre-compression. So that means that we have to compress this just a bit like that beforehand. So that's where we're going to mark off where we want everything to be. This pistol grip has the hole for the screw right here. So that means even on the back, if we put this on the very back, our rainbow catch would have to be right about there. So that's about an inch of pre-compression, and that's pretty perfect. So you know what, I think we're just going to go with that. This is the area where our catch is going to be. That means that right here is where the catch is. We're going to drill our hole that goes through, then right here, and the holes that are going to support the plunger, or the rainbow catch, are going to be just a bit in front of that. We can actually measure that out right here because we have the rainbow catch already assembled. So if our catch hole is going to be right there, the holes for the catch plate are going to be right there. Let's get this squared up, and then I'll make a mark for the 4 holes using this template. This has actually come in really handy. And then we drill the 4 holes. This time we just use 1/8, and we do the same thing as before. We drill and then we countersink. Now, one other thing to do is add some what we call speed holes here. That way it doesn't vacuum. A vacuum doesn't form behind the plunger head. So I'm going to put 2 3/8 inch holes right after those guys there. 2. A little off center, but who's counting? Now we're going to take our 9/64 drill bit and drill right through here where we said the rainbow catch was going to be. Yeah, a little off center again, but not a big deal. For this part, we're going to need a 1/8 inch drill bit, which we have right here, a 1/4 inch drill bit. Going to need to take some measurements as well. We want some holes down here on the bottom, but we're also going to need holes opposite of that at the top, because our screws are going to be sunk at the top. So let me just make a line there. Doesn't have to be perfect. And just quickly double check my measurements here. These holes are 1/2 inch apart each. Let me just write where these holes are on the grip itself so we can get an idea of where everything's going. 1, 2, and 3 on the bottom. Then we have 1, 2, 3 on the top. Those are where our holes are going to be. 1/8 inch bit, go through the top first. Then on the bottom. It's more important on the bottom, really, that these are lined up. And then drill those out. Now you'll see the reason we drilled those top holes out. This is a long shank countersink, and this is what I do for a lot of internal holes. Here we want to actually bevel out the inside, or the inside of these holes we drilled on the bottom right here. So I'm going to quickly do that, because what that means is we can then sink these flat top screws in there, and they're going to be out of the way when we try to put our plunger head assembly in. I'm just going to do that real quick. Now we can sink our pistol grip in there, and wow, we're pretty close to being done. I'm going to be using 3/4 inch flat top screws here. And if you have a little bit of blue tack, or that wall tack stuff, this helps a ton. You put just a little bit of that blue tack on the end of your screwdriver, and now you don't have to worry about this thing falling off. Tap these a little bit, because it is 3D printed, you don't want the thing to break on you. And if you want, you could also put a dot of Elmer's white glue in those holes, and it will prevent the screws from backing out. I've never had that problem before, but if you're paranoid about it, it's not going to hurt the integrity of the blaster in any way. Now we can actually put this together. And then once it starts to grip the threads in that pistol grip, you will not have any more problems. Hard to see at this camera angle, but you can see what I'm doing there. Screwing it in place. Let's get these other 2 in, and that's when we start to tighten it down. Oops. I'll be back in just a second when those 2 are done. Alright, this handle's on there nice and tight. just to be safe, I always like to do one of these. That's why these holes are here. It's not really necessary through the back because that's where all the screws are, but I like to put one just the front here, and then zip tie it down, then cut the rest off, just to make sure the thing doesn't torque itself off on you, so to speak. No more drilling from this point on, but this is probably the hardest part. You're going to want to first take some silicone grease. I like to just kind of do this and get it all up in there. Get it nice and lubricated. These things like to run wet. Clean out the inside of this with a paper towel or something, because there's a lot of gunk in there right now. Easiest way to do that is just to jam a paper towel in using the plunger rod you made. Stuff it in and then pop it back out. So now you cleaned out a lot of the parts and stuff that were in there. And then with the holes on the catch facing forward and the hole on the middle catch plate facing downward, put that back on with the spring right there. And now, I said this was the more difficult part because you have to compress a spring at this stage. So we're going to do just that. Rock this in from the back of the plunger. Just kind of do it and work it in there. And if you need to get it in, hold on, there we go. She's in. Now, push it all the way forward. And so now you're in. We still need to compress this part here. The best way to do that I've found is to take another piece of PVC and push it in until you line up those holes with the holes you just previously drilled. Again, make sure that other little piece is facing downwards. Make sure the hole on the middle catch plate is facing downward. This is always kind of a tedious part, so bear with me. Alright, then when you have a hole lined up, take one of your 1/2-inch screws and sink it in. I'm at a very awkward angle, so I may have to pull you away from the camera for a second. And then really, once you have the first screw in, the other ones will go in much easier. And you should be hunky-dory. Rainbows require a little bit of precision, so that's why I have this up. I've been asked to make something of a rainbow type for ever and ever and ever, so this is my answer to that. Hold on, you have to look at that. The whole handle's sheared off. I have a replacement, but I found that there was a defect right there, so that's why this sheared off. That's really okay, so we are back and running from that unexpected intermission. For some reason I was scratching my head as to why this wasn't catching, and we don't have a catch spring in there, so that makes sense, right? Let's put this all back together and resume. Alright, now that we have that taken care of, I've screwed in the parts of the catch. And now, here's the tricky part. Taking this screw with that little string or spring on it and getting it to line up with that hole that we drilled earlier. Putting it through the bottom of the grip and getting it in there. Finally have all that in. It's an omnidirectional catch in here, so it's giving me a ton of problems. I genuinely hate omnidirectional catches, but it's really the only thing that works for a pistol, so we're going to push forward anyway and give it a shot. I have this guy, it's going to be my trigger, and it has to go in using a screw here. So I'm quickly going to tap this out if it hasn't been done so already. It looks like it may have. And then just sink a screw in here. This little screw protruding out the bottom prevents it from coming all the way out. So it's not a spring-loaded screw or a spring-loaded trigger, but it is at least semi-retained. And the reason I don't like omnidirectionals is because it seems every time I make them I run into problems. Unidirectionals work almost exclusively, always work the first time, and they don't bind up on you. Because you're using, obviously, a spring, and with an omnidirectional, there's no support underneath it, it just crunches up into the recess that your catch is supposed to catch onto. So what's happening is the spring is getting bound up in that omnidirectional part, and I'm getting like a false catch. I'm being honest with you guys here, I don't mess around with you. You saw it, my handle broke, so... just gotta calm down for a second, and we will have this thing up and running in no time, right? Okay, I finally got the thing locking, so we're good with that. Basically, don't push that trigger screw or that catch screw in too deep, otherwise it will actually catch on the rod itself, and it won't do very well there. I'm going to put the rear support on now, just by drilling 1, 2, 3 holes and countersinking, doing the same thing we've been doing. And then all we have to do is cut this down to size and put on that rear grip, and we're actually very close to done. Alright, I added the back spacer and I put the zip ties back on. Now I just have to figure out how I'm going to cut and drill this. I think I can get it in my vise here, that way I can have it pull out, but really I'm not sure. So we're going to cut, drill, tap, and put this on there somehow. Alright, this turned out pretty well. I was able to pull it back and clamp it in a vise, and that's how I was able to do this. You can see this is the disc catch that I like, because you can get your whole hand in there and actually get it, as opposed to the ring where you only get one finger. I don't know, it turned out pretty well. Okay, so I really hate omnidirectionals. My last rainbow catch was kind of failed after a very, very small amount of testing, so I actually sanded down the threads, or filed down the threads from about here to here. I'm going to try screwing that back on. This is a new area for me too. I really hate omnidirectionals. I almost never use them. So let's see if this does any better. On the bright side, the plunger head itself seems to be holding up, and that padding is working. Alright, so we finally got it working. I really don't like omnidirectional catches. You shouldn't use them either. They're awful. 14-inch barrel on this, and I guess chopper is what they call this. A couple darts loaded in there. We're going to test it out. I do have it working now. So it's finally catching, actually working well. There we go. So we're getting rainbow ranges. I'm calling this a pistol. It's really not. It's really just a full size without a stock. But hope you enjoyed the video, and hope you now know not to use omnidirectional catches ever.